I've put together a list of 11 music production tips I've picked up over the past 12 years that I cannot live without, and I figured it would be selfish if I didn't share these with you, so here they are. Number 1, keep your drums tight and human at the same time. As a drummer, there are few things that bug me more than a sterile drum groove or terribly off the grid drums. Start by getting the most accurate take you can, because this isn't an excuse to be lazy. Once you've got that, you can quantize some of your drums. Typically the way I do this is to quantize the kick and maybe the snare depending on what the song and groove call for. But again, you want to make sure that the performance is as accurate as possible so you don't have to go and adjust the hi-hats like crazy and lose the groove you initially intended. This isn't for every genre, but when you want natural, human sounding drums, this is a great way to tighten them up. Number 2, drag MIDI into a region instead of quantizing. Whenever I had a piano part that started right before the region area, I used to just quantize the whole thing, or I'd go in and quantize the note or chord that was too early. A better way to approach this without losing the intended feel of the track is to select the whole chord and drag it into the region. Sometimes I may even just grab a couple of notes from the chord just to tighten it up without it feeling robotic. Play around with it and see how it affects your MIDI tracks. By the way, if you're getting any value out of this video, consider hitting that like button and subscribing if you haven't already. Number 3, manually editing unwanted noise. I cannot tell you how many times I've had to overcompensate my EQ and compression because of unwanted noise in my recordings. This could be loud breaths, mouth noises, or that screeching sound you get when changing chords on an acoustic guitar. Instead of using plugins to fight this, sometimes it's better to go in and cut around the exact problem area and either lower the gain of that clip or delete it entirely depending on what you're working with. This may seem like extra work, but I think it's less time consuming than dealing with it using plugins, and it will yield a better result. Number 4, automate electric guitar effects. If you're using plugins to emulate your electric guitar effects, it can be useful to go in after you get your take and automate things like turning pedals on and off. But have you considered automating those changes before you record? Once I have an idea of the roadmap of a song, I'll typically go in and create arrangement markers to make it super easy to navigate the track. If I already know what I want to do with my guitar effects, I'll just go in and automate changes throughout the session so that when I go to play the electric part, I'm actually hearing the changes and getting a better feel for how it'll sound as I'm playing it. And you can still go back and adjust stuff if you need to. Number 5, reverse crash. I've tried many risers throughout the years, and I've always had a hard time getting traditional risers to fit in with the types of tracks that I make. But at some point, someone introduced me to a reverse crash, and here's why it's so cool. You can take any crash sound, bonus points if it's a crash you're already using in your track, reverse it, and now you have a more natural sounding riser. I especially like to take that reverse crash and follow it up with the non-reversed version, which just brings a very natural sounding rise and fall to your transitions. Speaking of transitions, let's talk about one of my favorite types of section changes, the false transition. This is when you use a riser or dynamic performance to build up the end of a section like you're going into something big, but instead you go into something small. So instead of rising up, hitting the impact of the next section and riding that out, you rise up until the very end of the section into a lighter section that almost feels like you took the breath out of it. I just think this adds a really cool dynamic to the productions I've done this on. Number 7, running an IR on a DI acoustic track. I briefly mentioned this in another video, but it's really helpful in a pinch. If you're ever in a situation where you either don't have a mic or you're in a terrible room for recording acoustic guitar, people actually make IRs, or impulse responses, that are captures of a mic'd acoustic guitar. So you can just plug a 1/4-inch cable into your acoustic, assuming it has one, record the DI signal, load the IR into a convolution reverb like Logic Pro's Space Designer, and it'll give you a much more natural result than your DI sound on its own. Number 8, do not be afraid to switch up your bass sounds from time to time. I try not to go super crazy with different bass sounds throughout a track, but when I was making one of my songs called Intention, I just could not decide if I wanted a real bass part or to play in a synth bass part. Ultimately, I decided to use the verses to have this pretty cool electric bass part.
Girl, you know that I wanna work to make you smile all day.
But on the chorus, I tightened up the rhythm section and completely swapped out the bass with a plucky bass synth.
For you, I found a way to use intention.
It sort of felt like breaking the rules, but it actually turned out to be a neat way of making the track more interesting in a subtle way. While we're talking about bass, let's talk about layering bass sounds. You do have to be careful with this because you don't want to just stack and muddy things up, but one way of helping my bass stand out on multiple listening devices is to have 2 layers. One layer will serve as the deeper sound, the other will serve as the brighter sound. For example, I might use an electric bass with a sub bass, but there are no rules as long as they sound good together. Then you're going to want to EQ each of the sounds so that they're not stepping on each other, and that really helps to get the best of both worlds out of my bass sounds. Number 10, create a separate track for emphasis moments. Sometimes I want to add an interesting vocal throw or something of the sort, but instead of pulling up my automation, it's sometimes easier to create a duplicate track with only the portions you want to be affected by the throw. So I'll find one word or maybe one syllable depending on what I'm working with, or maybe I'm doing this on a snare every couple of measures. It's the same process. So I'll duplicate the track, add a crazy delay or whatever I'm doing to the end of the chain, and drop in the bits that I want affected.
Do the selfish mix for you, for you.
Now let's talk about one of my favorites, turning boring moments into interesting textures. This is a really cool way to come up with unique sounds without buying new plugins or samples that everyone is using. You can take a single little blurb like a coin hitting the ground or a knock on your desk, and one of my favorite things to do is add a stereo delay with different values, and it creates this sort of odd yet satisfying texture. But I want to know, what is your favorite production tip? It could be something I mentioned in this video, or maybe it's something that you use in your productions. Either way, let me know down in the comments section. After you do that, you might want to check out this video right here. And as always, thanks for hanging out.